Okay, welcome to recording. First one on the body system. Sorry that we didn't have any for the taxonomy unit, but this is your first one for the body systems. We're going to focus on digestion for this recording. And the first part is looking at the purpose of digestion or nutrition allocation to organisms. This pertains mostly to heterotrophs, organisms that need to obtain their energy via consuming some other organism, whether it be a plant in the case of an herbivore, or another animal in the case of a carnivore, or a mixture of the two in the omnivore setting. Or I should say, once you categorize that component, then you have to look at how are they feeding. So for example, this krill up here that is moving, a small shrimp-like arthropod, this one right here, is doing a filter feeding process, so that would be more like a suspension feeder. We have the caterpillar that's inside, literally inside the leaf, eating the leaf, and as it eats the leaf, leaving a trail of feces behind it, and that would be a substrate feeder because it's actually living inside the food that it's consuming. You have the feeder that is eating its food in a liquid form, and that would be a fluid feeder like a mosquito. And then you have this weird tangled conglomeration of reptile and reptile. And what you're seeing here is a boa constrictor of some sort that has consumed an alligator, and because of the size of the alligator, has actually ripped its abdomen open, and you have the alligator coming out of the inside of the boa constrictor. And in that example, then you have a bulk feeder. Humans are kind of well, they're omnivore, and they're not necessarily a bulk feeder. They're kind of a cross between a bulk feeder and an organism that takes a little bit more time with their food. And that's going to be our primary focus when we're looking at the digestive system. So as you already know, there are 4 steps of digestion: the ingestion, digestion, absorption, and excretion part. You should be able to pin down when these things happen, and be able to know all the organs that go into digestion, and I should say all 4 of these components of quote-unquote digestion, and then with that know what part of digestion or absorption or excretion is happening at each one of those locations throughout the system. Before we get into that, we need to talk about the comparative anatomy component of digestion. So right here you're looking at 3 different types of organisms that have what's called an alimentary canal. Alimentary being the simplest term, that we're going from mouth to anus. We have a complete system where there is compartmentalization, and different steps of digestion are going to occur throughout that process. More basic than that, which I do not have an image of, would be organisms that have gastrovascular cavities, right? And with the gastrovascular cavity, you have a mouth and an anus as one whole. The organism gets taken into the multicellular organism. I should say the organism that's being consumed gets taken into the multicellular organism that's consuming it. Digestive enzymes are secreted from the interior of the gastrovascular cavity. The organism that is being consumed gets digested, absorbed across the lining into the tissues that make up that other organism. Whatever does not get digested gets pushed back out the hole that it came in. That's very basic digestion, but it's extracellular digestion, right? Extracellular meaning that we are digesting outside cells. If the organism is even simpler, like single cell, they can actually do their digestion intracellularly. So that would be single-celled organisms like protists or bacteria. And then you also have multicellular organisms that are very simple, like the sponges, porifera. The ones that are gastrovascular taxonomy groupings would be things like Cnidaria, Ctenophora, and Platyhelminthes. Once you start moving into organisms that have complete digestive systems like alimentary canals, things get a little bit more complex, and they have a mouth and an anus, and that would be things all the way from the pseudocoelomates like Nematoda all the way to the very complex chordates like this aves that you see here, this bird. All right, that being said, we're focused on mammalian digestion, specifically human. You should be able to locate and walk through the entire digestive system. So I'm going to walk through it with you. You can pause at any time, make sure that you understand it. As far as quiz and test goes, you should be able to basically do it yourself, so that if there's a multiple choice question that asks, for example, what is happening in the stomach, you can pick the correct answer out of the choices that are provided. So first thing is ingestion, and we're going to take the food into the mouth, and in the mouth we're going to masticate the food. And mastication, the whole goal of mastication is to increase the surface area of the food. The purpose of increasing that surface area is to allow more enzymes to attack that in a much faster fashion. So we increase that surface area of that food. At the same time that it's in the mouth, we have the salivary glands. Here they're showing submandibulary and parotid glands that are in the sublingual, that are all secreting salivary amylase, which is an enzyme that's going to digest carbohydrates. Got carb digestion started. And I just say started because it's not completed. We're only working on very big polysaccharides at this point. And then they also add a little bit of lubrication to the food so that it can slide a little easier down that smooth muscle of the esophagus. The next step then is, after we masticate the food, we go to swallow, and we move into the next section, which is the pharynx. And that pharynx has two flaps that are really important. One is right here, and that is the epiglottis. I'm running out of space. L-O-T-T-I-S, I believe. The epiglottis is going to push downward as the food moves in to prevent any food from moving into the trachea, which is the windpipe, which kind of goes to the ventral part of your body, which is towards your chest. And the esophagus moves towards the dorsal part of your body, the back, and that prevents any, like I said, any food getting into the trachea. We don't want to choke. And then there's also the soft palate on the back half of your mouth, which is going to flex upward, and that's going to prevent any food from going into your sinus cavity near your nose. We don't want any of that to happen. If you've experienced a faulty component of your soft palate, is if you laugh when you have a liquid in your mouth, that liquid tends to come up into that nasal cavity, and that can be painful depending on what kind of liquid you take into your mouth. After the pharynx, then, we move downward to the next part, which is the esophagus. And in the esophagus, we're going to see smooth muscle contraction, pushing the food, which is now called the bolus, down towards the stomach. And that smooth muscle contraction, very wave-like, is called peristalsis. Peristalsis pushing the bolus down towards the stomach. Next, we get to the stomach. And the stomach has folding. We're going to see folding throughout the digestive system, but the stomach's foldings are called rugae. And rugae increase the surface area to release digestive juice, specifically hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid, we're around the range of pH of 1. It also releases an enzyme that's called pepsinogen. And pepsinogen turns into pepsin, which will start breaking down proteins. All right, so proteins start. Now, keep in mind, we had up in the mouth a totally different pH. It's not a pH of 1. And we had an enzyme secreted that's going to work on carbs up there. Well, this pH up here is much different in the mouth than it is down the stomach. So you're talking optimal curves. If you're at a pH of 1, over here, this carb enzyme is not going to work anymore. So once it drops into the stomach with the food, it becomes totally inactive, right? Otherwise known as denatured. The protein enzyme is going to work well in the pH of 1, but then if it moves to another compartment and the pH changes, which we will see in the small intestine, it becomes denatured as well. So it's going to churn up that food, and it's going to turn that food from a paste into more of a liquid. Right, and we call that liquid food now chyme. And that liquid food is going to be controlled. We don't want it to all dump into the small intestine at once. We want to be able to control it. And so we have a valve area or a muscle that's right at the base of the stomach there, and that's the pyloric sphincter. At the top half of the stomach, you have another one up here. That's called the cardiac orifice. If the cardiac orifice isn't working properly, sometimes the stomach acid can leach up into the esophagus and kind of burn the esophagus. We call that heartburn or acid reflux. So we're going to squirt that chyme into the next stage, which is the small intestine. Right, and the very beginning of the small intestine is called the duodenum. Right, and that duodenum is a very important location for you to know because we have two main organs that are going to start dumping their contents in there. One is the pancreas, and the other is the liver. The liver is going to produce bile. Bile is going to work on fats, specifically the emulsification of fats, meaning it takes big fat globules and it turns them into smaller globules to be able to be worked on by enzymes. The gallbladder here is going to store excess bile so that if we have an extra fatty food that we're consuming, it can release copious amounts of bile. If a person has his gallbladder removed, then it can't release as much bile at one given time, and they might have some issues digesting very fatty foods. The pancreas, dual function organ, which we'll talk about near the end of this, secretes digestive enzymes that are going to aid in the complete digestion of all the things that we've consumed, and a substance called bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is going to change this pH 1 of the chyme up to a pH of 8. And pH of 8 is what the enzymes that the small intestine need in order to function properly. So we dump all those into the small intestine. We do a complete digestion. I'm going to move forward a little bit here. And then in the small intestine, if you look at the images that your teacher gave you, the inside crosscut of a small intestine is incredibly folded. Right? As we know, the increasing in folding increases surface area. And since we can increase the surface area, if we zoomed in on these folds, you would see that these folds have little folds on them. Right? So we're looking at a fold. And then we zoom in on one of these folds, and you'll see cells that have little fingers on them called microvilli. And those microvilli also aid in that process of it increasing the surface area, which is going to allow for lots of absorption. Okay, we absorb all of our monomers across the epithelial lining of the small intestine and into the blood system, right? So this is all going to be lined. There'll be blood vessels that run up around these microvilli areas. And they'll absorb all those monomers as they come across and go into the bloodstream. We can distribute them all throughout the body and feed all the cells in our body. Whatever does not get absorbed then moves on to the next section, which is the large intestine. You don't necessarily have to know all the pieces of the large intestine. Just know that the large intestine's purpose is mostly to remove the water from the chyme, turning it to feces, and any vitamins and minerals that might be there. Keep in mind that the large intestine has tons and tons of bacteria that are going to help aid in your digestion and removal of water and vitamins and minerals. And if for some reason their balance is out of whack, for one reason or another, maybe you're sick, you have extra bacteria in there, you have a virus or something of that nature, obviously you can get a lot of pain because of it, right? Excess gas maybe, maybe some constipation. In constipation, the bacteria are causing excess water to be pulled out, so the stool is getting harder, and then if the bacteria throw it off where it's not pulling enough water out, the stool gets a little too liquidy, and we call that diarrhea, and that can obviously be burdensome as well. That is the complete digestion component, and we went all the way out to excretion. The last piece I want to show you is the feedback loop of insulin and glucagon. You definitely need to know this. So the pancreas secreted digestive enzymes through a tube, right, into the small intestine. Since it secreted it through a tube, we call that the exocrine system, or an exocrine gland. But here it's secreting insulin and glucagon into the bloodstream. When it's secreting things into the bloodstream, it's called the endocrine system. So right here you have an organ that we just crossed that has both endocrine and exocrine functions. The endocrine part, it's doing this negative feedback control where if glucose levels get too high in your blood, it secretes insulin, and insulin's like a little key. It opens the door of your cells, allows glucose to get into your body cells and out of the blood, hence the blood glucose level falls, or back to our normal level. If blood glucose levels are too low, well, then the pancreas will secrete glucagon, and glucagon will cause the liver to break down the stores of your polysaccharide of glucose, which is called glycogen, to be chopped up. And when you chop up glycogen, you have little pieces of glucose. So now your bloodstream is filled with glucose, bringing it back up to the homeostatic basis level that we need. Okay, so you got to understand what a negative feedback loop is. You got to understand these two hormones, insulin and glucagon, and obviously know that the pancreas is both endocrine and exocrine. And this concludes the recording for digestion. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, I wish you good luck on your studies.